So it's my pleasure, it's my honor to introduce Mr. Cameron, our first speaker. He's the Acting Assistant Secretary for Water and Science at the United States Department of the Interior. His current responsibilities include oversight of the Bureau of Reclamation, and he's also served in the department in the first Trump administration and under President George W. Bush. So Mr. Cameron, thank you so much for being with us today.
So good afternoon. Really happy to be with you all today. I've got about a 9-minute presentation, so hopefully that'll give us plenty of time for Q&A, and I'm really looking forward to that. So with no further ado, here we go. So as we gather here this week in Boulder, we stand at a pivotal moment in the stewardship of one of the most vital resources of our nation, the Colorado River. Our collective future relies on our ability to work together in a spirit of collaboration and shared responsibility. Ultimately, regardless of boundary lines that human beings like to draw on a map, or what we choose to designate somewhat arbitrarily as upper and lower basins, all the people who live in this watershed are all in it together, all 40 million of you. That being said, reaching a solution that works for all 40 million people in the watershed is not a trivial task, especially as we approach the expiration of the current operating guidelines. And let's not forget, there are a related series of interconnecting agreements within states associated with those 2026 guidelines. It's a top priority for the Department of the Interior and the Bureau of Reclamation to achieve a consensus agreement that acknowledges the needs and priorities of all stakeholders invested in the future of this great river. This collaborative approach is already in motion as we engage with basin states and tribes to craft a framework that fosters resilient management of this incredible but demonstrably not inexhaustible resource. With the active involvement of the Trump-Vance administration, these efforts are progressing comprehensively and deliberately, recognizing the importance of the varied interests of the multiple stakeholders across the 7 states and more than 30 tribes. The Colorado River is, quite frankly, as you all know, the lifeblood of the American West. It serves as the primary water source, as I've said twice now, for 40 million people, nourishing 5.5 million acres of agricultural land across 7 states. It fuels hydropower generation, as we discussed in part this morning, that lights our cities. It is crucial to the identity and prosperity of the 30 tribal nations that call this river home, as well as, let's not forget, 2 states in Mexico. The sustainability and health of the Colorado River are not just regional issues, they are national imperatives. The river impacts everything from the food on our tables to the electricity that powers our homes. The responsibility to protect this vital resource is not just a duty, it is a legacy we must uphold for future generations, as a number of the tribal representatives this morning underscored. In recent months, we at Interior have been actively meeting with the 7 basin states and tribes, engaging in productive discussions focused on developing a framework that underscores our shared responsibility. These meetings have been frequent and constructive, grounded in a mutual commitment to create a resilient future for the Colorado River. The commitment by the Department of the Interior and the Bureau of Reclamation to working with our non-federal partners to provide life-sustaining water and harnessing the river's hydropower capabilities is unwavering. I have been meeting probably every other week for maybe the last 8 weeks, more or less, with the 7 basin states in various locations around the West. So the department's political leadership is personally invested in working with the 7 basin states to come up with a solution. By legal mandate, the Secretary of Interior has a significant role in coordinating the operations of the Colorado River, including management of Lake Powell and Lake Mead. The Secretary is the water master of the lower basin and also has significant authorities in the upper basin. We are mindful that our approach to co-managing this precious resource must be efficient and responsible. We are committed to working closely with the 7 basin states. Their leadership and expertise are crucial to shaping the post-2026 operating guidelines. We respect their prerogatives and responsibility to their citizens in this critical process. We at the federal level have our own process constraints in the form of compliance with the National Environmental Policy Act, with the goal of having a new arrangement in place in time to execute for the 2027 water years at Lake Powell and Lake Mead. To facilitate this, we are diligently developing a timeline to finalize a post-2026 agreement. Reclamation is on track to release a draft environmental impact statement by the end of this calendar year, with a final EIS and record of decision by the late winter, early spring, maybe very early summer of 2026. It's imperative that the states capitalize on this opportunity. We are working very closely with all 7 states so we can craft alternatives in the draft EIS that are so broad so that as a group, their elements are likely to capture any realistic 7-state agreement, which ideally would simply, Interior would like to plug in as the preferred alternative and ratify in the record of decision. We are aware that the prior administration floated a series of alternatives late last year, but we do not feel bound by them. They certainly contain some good ideas, but they do not include a number of ideas that might also be helpful. We are approaching the selection of draft EIS alternatives with fresh eyes and open ears, actively soliciting feedback from the states, tribal nations, and a wide variety of stakeholders. Had some really good discussions with some folks in the conservation community just yesterday. This collaborative approach is crucial as we strive to create durable and well-informed solutions that truly reflect the diverse needs of all the people who rely on the Colorado River. It's also vital to highlight our dedication to meaningful tribal consultation as part of the EIS process. The 30 federally recognized tribes in the basin possess deep historical ties to the Colorado River, as I'm sure you're all very much aware. But we do realize that they have very different needs and opportunities to be involved in helping us forge a future for the river. Some have senior water rights, others have junior water rights. Some have enacted water rights settlements, others do not. However, we acknowledge our federal trust responsibilities to all those tribes. We welcome their good ideas, and frankly, there have been a lot of good ideas coming out of the tribes, and desire to be involved in their efforts to contribute to the common good of everyone who lives in the watershed. We're encouraged by the progress the states have made thus far and are optimistic about the path ahead. Beta was teasing me earlier about are we hopeful or are we confident? So we are hopefully confident. But it's not a done deal until it's a done deal. Yes, the Colorado River faces complex challenges, but through creative thinking and open minds, we can forge a durable agreement that respects all users and safeguards the future of this critical resource. Make no mistake, the time for action is now. We do not have a lot of time to waste, people. The primary responsibility lies with the states because it's your citizens who live here. Let's not forget that. And the states know this river best, and the people who live here have the most stake in the outcome. The Department of the Interior and Reclamation stand firmly committed to proactively supporting their efforts every step of the way, ensuring that we can meet our shared goals for a sustainable Colorado River. That being said, in the, we hope, highly unlikely and unfortunate event that there is no 7-state agreement on a timely basis, Secretary Burgum is prepared to exercise his responsibility as water master. He's not looking forward to that, but in the absence of a 7-state agreement, he will do it. Thank you for your attention and your openness to hearing what I had to say today. Together, I'm confident we can secure the future of the Colorado River for generations to come. So that ends my prepared remarks, and I'm happy to deal with questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cameron, for those comments. And I think I'll just kick us off, and then we'll turn it over to Celine for some additional Q&A. But I know that many of us here are concerned about the impacts of the staffing reductions on the Bureau. And I've seen reports anywhere from 25% to 40% reduction in staff possibility. And so I wonder if you could provide any updates on how significant the staffing cuts have been and whether you can reassure us that, the Bureau has the resources it needs to maintain the critical infrastructure we've been talking about.
Well, I've had the pleasure of working with the Bureau of Reclamation staff on and off throughout my career, or at least going back to 1985, and I'll say they have been chronically overworked and underpaid. So that's been a given, I think, for quite a long time. But to get to the point of your question, we have been working, by we, I mean the political leadership of the department has been working very hard to try to mitigate any unintended consequences of what are national level initiatives to reduce overall federal spending. And I'm constantly, and I think probably 2 or 3 times a week, asking a reclamation senior leadership in Washington to let me know if there is anything we can do to bolster the staffing for the Bureau of Reclamation in the upper and lower basins and in our modeling operation that Carly runs so well, here in Boulder. And quite frankly, there are some minor issues in the Central Valley Project of California that we need to pay attention to from a staffing perspective as well. So we are trying to mitigate on a case-by-case basis the impacts of some of those national level decisions, and been fairly successful so far. And I keep on asking Reclamation's career folks to tell me what else they need and try to be responsive to that.
Great, thanks so much. Celine, do you want to jump in?
I can, and thank you so much for joining us today. The first question comes from a discussion that we had yesterday around whether there's a need for a mediator or a facilitator in the process. There was a suggestion on a panel that that might in fact be the Bureau of Reclamation, but do you think that an external mediator is needed for the 7 states to come to consensus?
Personally, no. What I can tell you is what Secretary Burgum has twice told me when I briefed him on the Colorado a week or 2 apart back in late February, I guess it was. The first thing he said was, I want this department's political leadership to be personally, intensely, and constantly involved in discussions with the 7 basin states. The department's political leadership is showing up and fully engaged. The second thing he said was, I really want a 7-state agreement and do whatever you can in working with the 7 states to help them get to that place. But he also said, I will do my duty as water master, if I have to. So the short answer to your question is, no, I don't think you need an external moderator. The Interior Department has got basin-wide responsibilities. I think it's responsibility of the Interior Department to try to play that role. And we have been working intensely with the 7 basin states to try to play that role.
Thanks. I'm going to ask a NEPA question. There's a question about, it was super helpful to hear the timeline, and thank you. There was a question on whether you would foresee that moving into an expedited NEPA timeline at any point in the process, as we've seen some recent processes do.
So the department is in the process of revising its approach to NEPA compliance. And at the risk of telling the 7 basin states you may have an extra 2 or 3 months to play with in terms of your negotiations, to the extent we can use any of the regulatory reform initiatives coming out of the broader administration that might be applicable in terms of our NEPA process, then we would want to take advantage of those flexibilities if it looks like it's really going to result in a 7-state deal. I don't think it would be much value in delaying things without having a high level of confidence that that delay is going to produce a 7-state deal.
Thanks. There's a question here about the current hydrologic models in the basin, and I know you said that the intent is for the NEPA to cover a wide range of potential actions. Does the leadership of the Department of Interior take the hydrologic model that are showing some pretty serious effects of climate change seriously in regards to future Colorado River management?
I think it's pretty clear to everybody, and probably even most third graders in most schools in the both basins would come to the conclusion that there's less water going to be in the Colorado than there was 20 years ago or 40 years ago or 60 years ago. So that's an external reality, that we have to deal with. And our modeling is running lots and lots of different scenarios, including some doomsday scenarios and some we're absolutely awash in water scenarios. But I think, real world, we all know that there's a lot less water in the Colorado than we thought there was going to be 10 or 20 years ago. And that's probably not going to change a whole bunch.
All right, there's a couple of infrastructure questions, and I'll give them both to you.
Okay.
First, how is the Bureau reckoning with the infrastructure limitations at Glen Canyon when operating with such reservoir conditions? And what is Reclamation doing to ensure the safety of dam and infrastructure releases? Can you guarantee minimum staff necessary for dam operations?
So the last question I think is the easy one to answer. Yes, absolutely. And if anybody anywhere has at least been a glimmering that we've lost someone who's critical to operating Glen Canyon or Hoover or frankly any of our other reclamation dams across the West, send me an email and I'll try to get that problem fixed within 24 hours. But in terms of the Glen Canyon infrastructure issues, the reality is we're dealing with a dam that was built decades ago, right? And redoing a dam is not a simple matter. I listened to the presentation this morning. Drilling those 2 boreholes around the dam seems conceptually easy. I wonder how many billions of dollars that would cost. And I wonder if there isn't a smarter way to invest that money across the 7 states to arrive at a more durable solution. And we're very much aware of the fact that the hydroelectric generating capacity at Glen Canyon and Hoover, for that matter, might be at some risk under some situations, and that the amount of water you can actually push through Glen Canyon is dependent in part on the elevation of that reservoir as well. So we are, nervously watching and very mindful of those considerations. And don't forget, the Bureau of Reclamation is chock full of engineers, right? So they are constantly worrying about the engineering implications of 1 or 2 foot change in water level, in any of our reservoirs.
So there's a question about the Salton Sea, which we haven't heard much about this week. In the post-2026 plan, how are we going to account for the fact that reductions in IID's use of Colorado River water could reduce water in the Salton Sea?
So that's a real legitimate concern. And I know there's a lot of interest at the state level, and there are federal equities in terms of national wildlife refuges, around the Salton Sea and associated with IID project, of course. The short answer is we are not directly taking on the Salton Sea as part of this NEPA process, at least in terms of what you should expect to see in our draft EIS alternatives. If the public comment period generates some issues regarding the Salton Sea that we think we need to address, then we'll address them. But quite frankly, we've got enough problems worrying about Lake Mead and Lake Powell than to try to figure out how to solve the Salton Sea at the same time.
I'm going to combine a couple of questions. How can you get the 7 states to move away from just no? And is there a way to come to an agreement without harming some of the underlying parts of the law of the river?
So I guess a few reflections on that. So since I started engaging with the 7 states directly, I guess March sometime, maybe JB was the first meeting, my impression is they really want a deal. They really want to find a path forward to working together. And I'm 100% convinced that they're all sincere in that regard. They're obviously coming from somewhat different perspectives. 2 or 3 states in particular are maybe the loudest or the most vociferous about what they're interested in or what they're worried about, and that's fine. That's to be expected. One of the things Interior has been trying to do since March is to signal that it's okay to think outside the box. It's okay to consider options that might not necessarily have been considered reasonable before. And in terms of the law of the river, that's not one document that's 5 pages long, right? That's quite a complex legal framework. And some aspects of that legal framework can be changed by a future act of Congress, can be changed or at least affected by an action of the Arizona or Colorado state legislatures. So we don't take all aspects of what people lump together as the law of the river right now to be fixed in perpetuity. Law tends to be a lagging factor. It lags what the needs of a society are. So if the needs of society change, then we ought to be open to having a conversation about changing existing law.
So there are a couple of questions in here about the tribal nations in the basin, some questions about what it means to be a trustee, and if you can talk about what it might mean to have equal participation of tribal nations in Colorado River processes.
Okay, so I could approach that in several different ways. In terms of what we think of as our trust responsibility to the tribes, for one thing, it's the Secretary of Interior, as opposed to one of our individual bureaus that has a trust responsibility. And this particular secretary came from North Dakota. He was governor there. He had a very strong relationship with the North Dakota tribes, and he wants to have an equally solid relationship with all the tribes around the country. So what does this mean as a practical matter? What this means is we are having very frequent conversations with the tribes in the basin that are interested in talking to us about what they feel their needs are, what their priorities are, what their hopes are for the future of the Colorado. Met with several upper basin tribes yesterday. I've had the pleasure of meeting with Heel River and Crit and Auction, individually, in some cases on multiple occasions. As Bitta pointed out earlier, all those tribes are in very different places, and there's no one size fits all. And what's going to work for one tribe is probably going to not work for most of the other 30. So we really need to have these conversations on a one-on-one basis. That having been said, trying to negotiate with 37 people in the room is a lot more complicated than negotiating with 7. But as Interior has been participating in these conversations with the 7 basin states, always in the back of my mind and often in the forefront as the conversation flows back and forth, I'm asking myself, what are the implications for the tribes of a particular scenario that's being floated, or the particular direction a conversation is going? And we are circling back to the tribes as a sensible to try to get more input from them as well.
Well, I think we may be close to time, and I might want to hand it back to Chris at this point.
Sure. We maybe have time for one more.
One more.
Yeah.
All right. This is a broad one. What can the federal government do to increase the resilience of the Colorado River Basin?
One thing we can do, and we've already taken we've taken a step in this direction. We've met with the staff of the congressional delegations of the 7 basin states a few months ago, actually, and said, don't be surprised if we come to you sometime around March 2026 and ask you folks to pass some sort of new law that locks in a seven-state agreement. And frankly, we've had conversations with some tribes and encouraged them, and God help us, their lawyers, to start thinking about whether or not there might be changes in current law affecting the tribes that might be part of a legislative package for associated with a seven-state agreement. So to the extent flexibility and resilience can be accomplished through changes in law as opposed to changes in simple behavior or assumptions about what's within the realm of the possible, we've already flagged for the Congress that we may ask them to do something.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Cameron. Please join me in thanking our speaker. Okay, we're going to move on now, and I think if we could get Colby and Chuck to join us up here. That last answer was enlightening. It looks like we'll all be talking to Congress later this spring. How exciting. It's easy to get things done in Congress, as we all know. Okay, so I think we'll have Chuck go first. I'll introduce both speakers, and then I'll invite Chuck to the podium, and then Colby, and then we'll have Q&A. So our next speaker is Mr. Chuck Collum. He serves as the executive director of the Upper Colorado River Commission. And before that, he was the Colorado River Programs Manager for the Central Arizona Water Conservation District. And Ms. Pellegrino is the Deputy General Manager of Resources for the Southern Nevada Water Authority and the Las Vegas Valley Water District. And she's also served as a key role in protecting Nevada's interests and rights to Colorado River water and modeling efforts to assess the future of the river. So I'll invite Mr. Collum to the podium.
All right. This is yours. Just an example of the Upper Division states giving. Well played. Oh my gosh. I am here to report a couple of things. One is that there is neither whiskey nor coffee in these darn mugs. I'm just gonna go with that. I was gonna lead off with Colby and I are pleased to report that the upper and lower basin have reached consensus. There will be no slides today. That was actually a quiz, a test from JB to see if I could be mildly humorous, and I think the emphasis was on mild. I've spent some time here over the past 2 days to reflect on the panels, the hallway discussions, and you know, the good thinking of many people here. And I have 3 reflections I'd like to share with you, and then my perspective as an observer, not as the executive director of the Upper Colorado River Commission or a messenger of the Upper Division state commissioners, just Chuck's view of the landscape with the basin states. For the attorneys, that is a disclaimer, so I hope you all honor that. Doug challenged Patty Limerick to reflect on the legal policy box that the basin states find themselves. I'm going to reject that hypothesis and say that we are in neither a legal nor policy box. We are a box constructed from hydrology. Patty talked about the river of dreams and aspirations and how the steamboat crashed into the sandbars repeatedly. And I think that is an apt framework for where we are with regards to trying to think about how we have built a culture, economies, myths and legends around what the Colorado River is. We're at a point where we need to adapt our expectations and how we manage the river with the river we have and not the river as we want it to be. I think we need stark reality, and it's coming to us anyway. So when people come to you and they say, I have a legal theory that requires this volume or that action, those people will be desperately frustrated with the facts of a drier future. I think we just need to honor that and think about that. What we have is largely a math problem. We have sophisticated models. We spend a lot of time and energy. I think Central Arizona Project shared with me a couple of weeks ago, they had CRSS run 270 odd. People are trying to turn this thing upside down and sideways to find a unicorn. It is probably not an operational scheme that prevents us from the challenges that this drier future brings to us. I'm sorry, I'm channeling a little Eeyore or Brad, sorry. But having looked at the May 24-month study that Reclamation prepares, we are approaching Groundhog Day for 2022, the summer of 2022, when the 7 basin states came together and took proactive action in concert with the Bureau of Reclamation to address desperately low reservoir elevations and did some creative things and addressed a near-term crisis. We're sitting collectively at less than about 40% of storage between Powell and Meade. These are facts. Second observation is the panel that was focusing on the lessons from the 07 guidelines and the drought contingency plans. I found Mike Connor's comments incredibly compelling about being humble with ourselves, with our ability to ascertain the future and build solutions that will address what we know is deep uncertainty. And the need to set aside the personal investment in a particular outcome and listen to a framework of solutions. And I think Reclamation, you heard from Scott, is listening and considering a menu of approaches that rely on the good thinking from the previous administration, from the current administration, from the basin states, from water users, from stakeholders and tribes across this basin to put a package together. And I think that is a very thoughtful and humble way to approach this problem. And I want to thank the Reclamation team for being present in previous years and now to help the basin states and tribes and other stakeholders address this critical problem. Scott is forthright and direct and asks continually what more the basin states and others need as resources to help. And he has made good on any request for that support. So I appreciate that. Brad Udall noted the future uncertainty of hydrology. That's a way to say what he said for more polite company, but I do appreciate his comments. And for me, it outlines the need to be thoughtful about building space in the operational scheme in post-2026 to adapt to things we don't know. We don't want to run the next set of guidelines at the edge of the model space to avoid uncomfortable conversations. We need to have those conversations and give ourselves space to be successful, to avoid over-planning so we can adapt to that uncertainty. My colleague and friend, Colby Pellegrino, frequently quotes one of the preeminent water management cinematic epics of our time, Frozen and Frozen 2. Let it go. Can't run from this. And water has memory. People have invested significantly in their local and regional drought resiliency, and I think we should acknowledge that. Southern Nevada has put more than $1.5 billion, and I'm probably underestimating, Colby can correct me, which she is frequent to do, to build their infrastructure to adapt to declines in Lake Mead, to support local conservation, and to build to store water in Lake Mead. California, through the QSA, a very painful process, has adapted to a declining supply from a policy perspective. MET has built the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. They're very proud of that capital T, has built flexibility by linking their management scheme between the State Water Project, which is even more variable than the Colorado, and their Colorado River supply through their ICS processes. And the Imperial Irrigation District stepped forward and made significant compensated conservation commitments of probably north of 800,000 acre feet. Does the compensation end with a B, más o menos? Speaking of wet water, Arizona has diverted and stored more than 13 million acre feet of Colorado River water underground as their drought resiliency plan to address future local supply challenges through their state and agency water banks. The 4 upper division states with reclamation have implemented the drought response operating agreement in 22, 23, and probably 25 or 26, where we move water from the upstream initial units, Flaming Gorge and Blue Mesa, to protect the operating scheme at Glen Canyon Dam. The upper division states also manage their water supplies within the available supply. This year, they will likely reduce their irrigation footprint by 100,000 acres or more, with reductions probably, just looking at the hydrology, somewhere between 700 and 1 million acre feet from the previous year. The Ute Mountain Ute tribe is facing a 70% water supply cut because of shortage on the Dolores. These are real wet water cuts. They are not paper. The people who are reduced feel this pain across the upper basin, consistent with everyone's economic dislocation because of reductions in water supply. The status of the basin states discussions from my perspective. The 07 guidelines have not left us much space, have not left the commissioners and their lower basin counterparts much space, runway, landing room, resiliency, whatever you want to call it. They have a very heavy lift, but they are working very hard. Reclamation is part of that approach, and people are bringing creative ideas forward to adapt to that drier future, to mitigate the impacts of economic dislocation due to reductions in water supply. I believe they can find a way to fit these new schemes into the existing legal and policy framework and live within the operational facts of the system. Jay Weiner talked about, the stages of grief at the earlier panel about denial and anger and the need to be at bargaining. I believe that's where the basin states are. With that, Colby.
my remarks are not nearly as well prepared as Chuck's. But I'm going to spend a little bit more time just sort of commenting on where we're at today. I'm going to start with a quote that I really like. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Revolutionary War. I'm going to talk about grace, and I'm going to talk about divorce. Those are all things that are relevant in both my personal and professional life, and I'm going to draw some metaphors between the two, hopefully bringing a little bit of the humor we need that Patty talked about to what's a very heavy, heavy discussion. So the one that I will start with is, in the end, only three things matter: how much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of the things not meant for you. I try really hard to rely on that in my personal life. That brought me a lot of peace in letting go of an ex-husband. But I think it's really relevant to the state of where things are in negotiations today. The upper basin has a proposal on the table. The lower basin has a proposal on the table. Neither of those things work for the other basin. And we really were at a standstill on trying to continue to merge those two paths together. They look very similar. They're really, it's the details of all of this stuff that's perplexing. And so I think what we are seeing right now is trying to gracefully let go of those two things that are not meant to be the consensus path forward. Lots of other people have spoken about the need to be creative, the need to think outside of the box, the need to move in a different direction. And I agree wholeheartly with all of those things. And for those of you that were at the dinner last night, our host made a very wonderful an impassioned speech about being frustrated with where we're at today and frustrated with our state negotiators, which was wonderful to sit and be the only state negotiator in that room hearing. But I shall tell you, I am frustrated too. I've worked on this river for 22 years. My entire career has been spent negotiating for the state of Nevada. And Nevada lives or dies based on the willingness of the other 6 states to get shit done. We've got 1.8% of the allocated water on the river. So trust me when I say I'm as frustrated as all of you. We can implement $3 billion in resiliency projects and conservation funding, and it still does not change the course of the river unless everyone else changes as well. And I think that what this basin needs is a divorce. And that's relevant to my personal life. I've been through that. It's a lot prettier on the other side. But we're at the point where we've lost our decorum and we've lost our grace in a lot of ways. The people that negotiate on this river, the people that use water on this river, the people that are looking to get water from the river, all have built an inherent amount of distrust about everyone else doing the right thing. Lorelei made some wonderful comments about equity and that we need to find equitable solutions going forward. And hers was in the context of the tribes. And I would say, I agree that we need to find equity, but equity in this basin is in the eye of the beholder. And the law on this river is not equitable. It's just not. We have present perfected rights. We have pre-compact water rights in the upper basin. We have water users that have different priority dates. We have tribes that have different priority dates. We have tribes that are allowed to use their water off reservation and market it, and tribes that are not. We have the environment, which largely does not have a voice in river negotiations at all. We have junior priority users in the lower basin who think equity is anybody senior to them participating. And we have senior water right holders who rightfully are saying, I shouldn't have to take my fair share until the juniors do theirs. There is no equitable solution in this basin in everyone's eyes. It simply does not exist. But the more time we spend pointing fingers at one another and trying to sow distrust in the institutions that we have, the further we are going to come from being able to produce 7-state consensus. And when I say I'm disappointed, I really feel that deeply when we start questioning whether the water people have saved is real or not. When we start comparing whether the sacrifice of one farmer is better or worse than the sacrifice of another farmer, whether the hardship here is greater than the hardship there, we are not going to get to consensus, period. And that's what I think we're going through is the divorce now. And I think what the divorce means in my mind is we have to find a way as an upper basin and a lower basin to stop nitpicking and sowing distrust about the actions of the other basin. And we're both guilty of it. The upper basin is guilty of calling the lower basin's programs and accounting fake. And the lower basin is guilty of having the same exact criticisms about the upper basin trying to create the same exact programs. And we have to move away from that. We have to find a way to operate this river where the upper basin can take care of their business and the lower basin can take care of their business. And I think that we're actually making progress in moving in that direction right now, which is going to bring me to my Revolutionary War metaphor. So I have 2 kids of my own. I live with my boyfriend. He has 2 kids, and the 2 younger boys are in the backyard the other day, and they've gotten water balloons, and they are Revolutionary War style, standing there, pelting the other one with a water balloon as hard as they can. They're not running from each other. They're not hiding. And then they let out a, okay, my turn. And then they go pick up a water balloon and they do the same exact thing to the other one. And they did this for 40 water balloons. And I said, do you guys want to like run or hide or like try it? No, this is fun, Mom. Okay. But I kind of feel like that's what the basin has been doing to each other. For the last couple of years, we've sort of just been standing there throwing water balloons, maybe not water balloons, but throwing, maybe they are water balloons at each other. And I think there's 2 observations I have. While we stand at the front line and take shots, we've been placing those shots at one another. And really, we're all on the same front line here. And what's on the other side is Mother Nature. Chuck hinted at that. The box here is hydrology. It's not one another. But we've made it one another. We've made it who are we to blame so that we don't have to do as much hard work. And that's why we're stuck. But what we have to do as water users, as negotiators, as people interested in the survival of the West, is we've got to provide some sort of armor to our state principles to get momentum moving in a cooperative direction. And we've heard that from quite a few people here, that we need to encourage people moving in the right direction. And I cannot underscore that enough. Nevada is blessed to have fairly homogeneous water users. and to have a lot of political support, but that is not true in every state. And if every whisper of what we are working on results in every person who's worried about how it might affect them running and saying, this isn't the deal for us, we're never going to get there. And we really need to invest in telling our commissioners, our governors, our elected boards, our officials that we want the compromise solution. That we want the 7 states to be there signing the document at the end of the day. And that message has not resonated in every state equally. And that's the support that I'm asking all of you for. We need to get off of the front line, and we need to armor the people that are negotiating to actually make some sacrifice, to make some compromise, and to get enough momentum moving into a single direction that we might actually be able to make a deal. But if we demand that every single person be briefed on every single aspect of an alternative that has not yet been developed or even understood, we are never going to make progress. We have to let people develop enough understanding of what we're talking about that they can get the support they need to take the next step forward. That's how we advance the front line. And we've done a really crappy job of that. Everyone in this room, we need to do more to support the compromise. And it's going to take everyone. I have a couple other quotes. The one that's worth mentioning is I really was struck by a small tidbit of what Bida said today, which was, how do we keep our culture thriving? And that was very specific to the Navajo Nation and some of the things they're going through. But that's what's so hard about this chapter of Colorado River negotiations. We have sat in a place where we've been able to celebrate a lot of victories together. Chuck and I have sat and shared the pens and the party hats and the appetizers and the beverages that go along with them many times. But we've largely sat in a place where we're not asking everyone to make sacrifices. And that's what's different about this round. There is a massive cultural change that has to happen in this basin about how we use water. And that is going to affect the culture of every single water user. It's going to affect the way we farm, the farming methods we use, what's acceptable within an urban area. What are the places we should actually be investing in using water, and what are the places that it just doesn't make sense for that to keep happening. And we need to be doing that cultural change very rapidly. And that's what's so challenging right now. We've, like Chuck said very eloquently, we've not left a lot of room. The consequences of 1 or 2 bad years are immediate. We don't have the luxury that we had in 2007 that we don't actually incur a shortage for over a decade later. If we experience another really bad year, we're going to have major cultural shifts that have to happen overnight within all of our water use communities. And we need to rapidly get our heads around that's where things need to change. I would also say that for everyone who's really frustrated that there's not information coming out, we're trying to make a really big pivot. And that takes a lot of time for people to understand. Even the people that are in the room, even the people that understand the water users, the basins and all the laws, figuring out how it affects you, whether or not it's reasonable for you to assume that risk takes time. We've got great federal engagement right now. We're using the reclamation modeling team in the way they were meant to be used for the first time in a while, and really trying to push forward on working together, and that gives me hope. And so with that, I'm going to end with my other favorite divorce quote. It's more sentimental than you guys might realize. But it's a little discouraging when you've done this for 22 years and you sit here and you realize everyone's mad at your progress. I I come to work, I give my all every day. I've been trying my damnedest to be creative. But I think this one is relevant. And it says, one day she realized she couldn't solve all the problems. She could just do her best. She wasn't perfect. She sure did try. She kept showing up. She kept balancing. She loved. She learned to live with grace, grace for others, grace for her own journey. And she became proud of her imperfectly beautiful story. That is the story of my personal life to a T. But I think that's something that this basin should be aspiring to be. We need to keep showing up. We need to keep balancing. And we really need to learn to live with grace for the other water users, for the other state, for the other basin, because our own journey is inherently interconnected. And we are not going to stand on the other side and be proud of our imperfectly beautiful story if we don't offer each other a bit more grace. That's all I've got.
Thank you, Colby, and thank you, Chuck. And we're right on time. We have about 30 minutes for Q&A, and I'll turn it over to Celine in a second. I wanted to, and you maybe implied this a little bit, that you're working really well with the Bureau at the moment and the modelers, but I wanted to maybe ask you both the flip side of the question that I posed to Mr. Cameron earlier, which is from your position, given the steep reductions in force across the federal government, are you confident right now that the department and the Bureau are appropriately resourced and prepared to succeed in navigating this current planning process, as well as maintaining and operating the critical infrastructure across the system?
So I'm not going to be professing to understand everything that reclamation does and does not do. The service that we are receiving and the engagement we are receiving right now in terms of negotiation is exemplary. We know that there is conflict and concern in many areas of reclamations management. For example, just losing quite a bit of staff on the MSCP program. And we have a lot of unanswered questions about how does that get backfilled? What happens next? That what I'm encouraging my staff to do is take a deep breath, because I don't think reclamation staff has all the answers either. But we've built these programs over decades, and they're not going to crumble overnight. So I think we have some unanswered questions. But what we're seeing in terms of engagement is exemplary right now.
And just want to echo what Colby described. I'll give you one concrete example. The basin states asked for some they were high-level words, but the modeling request was, sort of deeply technical and nuanced, and wanted the results in about 10 days. And they delivered world-class analysis and visualization within that space for this process. I also echo what Colby said. There are lots of concerns about the skinnying up the capacity, the bandwidth of folks. If you don't have a backfill and you absolutely need a vacation to stay relatively sane, that capacity should be there, and that's a question I don't know the answer to, but to Scott's point, so far, every request that the basin states have made of reclamation have been met in their usual world-class way.
Thanks, that's encouraging. And Mr. Cameron just had to run and catch a plane, so just wanted to explain his departure. Maybe one more question, and then I'll turn it over to Celine, but riffing off of your divorce metaphor or comparison, we heard from Mr. Cameron, maybe a draft EIS by the end of the calendar year, possibly even going to Congress to ask for some type of ratification or support in March. Divorces can be slow and can take a lot of time. It's not always a quick process. Is the timelines that you all are working on and what you're talking and your discussions, is it consistent with what you just heard from Mr. Cameron in terms of the federal government's timeline? And so how do you think about that divorce process syncing up with the federal government's planning process?
Not at all.
Thanks. I was talking in the hallway with some people who were in the room in 04, 05, 06, 07, and their collective observation was, if this conference had been held on this day in 2007, the angst, the drama, the tension would largely be the same because the deal wasn't hammered out quite yet. So when you're talking about, is there time to get this done? It depends on this. A basin states consensus framework. I am optimistic that if folks are willing to achieve a consensus agreement, the architecture of that amicable separation is available, and people of good character can get there. There's a whole host of other aspects that need to be worked on, perhaps in parallel, which are the implementation agreements that will be necessary among folks in the upper basin, among folks in the lower basin, among the 7 states, individual water user agreements with entitlement holders in the lower basin, tribal engagement, and potentially new agreements between states and tribes to do some of these innovative approaches for water storage. And federal legislation, state legislation, all of that needs to get wrapped really quickly. I believe there is time. I believe, as Colby said, that people of good character can extend grace and find compromise if you all support them. So sometimes you need the armor in the front, sometimes you need the armor in the back, but I think there's space to get it done.
Yeah, I think one thing that this process has been plagued by is the expectation that every deadline is suddenly the deadline where we're going to have 7-state consensus. And I certainly feel like that's the media's expectation. What's the announcement? What's coming up? What are we going to hear? What are we going to find out? And that's their job. I'm not dogging on them for that approach. But the deadline is not today. That's what I know. And I know that we work better with a deadline. The states have a good history of cooperation, but we don't get to the end without some pressure. And I said I like metaphors, and I've been searching for a metaphor for this one. It's like if we put everyone in the room and said, you have to pay property taxes. We need property taxes to have schools and healthcare and everything else. But we're going to let you all just be in the room and decide what your property taxes are. And that's a little how the states function without a deadline. So we have to have some structure to the negotiations. I know that we can get to a place where this river will function, whether that's a 7-state agreement for 20 years, whether that's a Band-Aid that's short-term. I'm have no crystal ball on that, but there's enough people that want us to work together through this that I'm confident we will be able to act. And to the extent that we don't, that's the pressure we need is the federal government saying, we're going to figure it out if you don't.
I think Bill Hazenkamp said something really important yesterday. Hey, Bill, get off your phone, man. It's a shout out. Sorry. Yeah, that's why they don't let me up here very often. But the punchline that Bill brought forward is California missed a critical deadline and still got their deal done. So there is space to get this work done in a collaborative, cooperative fashion, and we should acknowledge the hard work that people like JB, Esteban Lopez, and others have made to go out and reach out to one another and to put some structure into this process, recognizing that to manage your own destiny, you need to make your own decisions.
Okay, thank you. I'm assuming there's a few questions from the audience relating to divorce or maybe water balloons. So I'm going to pass it over to Celine.
All right. Well, the highest voted question involves neither divorce nor water balloons, so I will give it to you. So there's a high chance that flows at Lee Ferry will fall below either the 82.5 over 10 or 75 over 10 in 2027. How are you preparing for that scenario?
Oh, I think that is a fact. That's not disputable. Just like Chuck's were less than 40% full. Everybody can look at the flow in Lee's Ferry and know what it is. I think it underscores the need for the states to come together and agree to some sort of compromise. It's very hard to imagine that if this river system goes to the Supreme Court, that anyone wins. But if we leave those historic markers unflagged and unaddressed, we greatly increase our legal risk. So it just underscores the need for us to work cooperatively together.
So I started with the idea that folks who assert a finite volume as their legal theory are going to be sorely disappointed with the facts of the river in the future. So yes, assert that there's a delivery obligation of X, Y, or Z. And then what? Year 3, what have you done to build your community's resilience to a drier future, except spend a crap ton of money on perhaps some people in this room as attorneys, or in the case of long-term litigation, the children of people in this room on attorneys, when there's a path to success. I was really struck by some comments from Peter Ortego and Bitta and Jason Howder in particular about the job is to protect your people. And the commissioners from the upper division states are working to protect their people. tribes, non-tribes, all the sectors. The California governor's representative, the Arizona's governor's representative, Nevada's governor's representative, same thing. So does it serve your people to have a conflict where it is wildly uncertain that you're going to do better even if you prevail 100%? I think the hydrology is clear. And I think that's a word salad to echo what Colby said. There's a path for compromise, for collaboration, and coexistence to raise the kids together but separately. Is that how divorce works? Okay.
You divide assets, you define custody. There you go. Thankfully, Chuck and I have no children together. And our assets are dwindling, so this should be going fairly quick.
All right, moving in a different direction. As fast as we can. You've heard a lot of different stakeholders speak to the importance of a living river. What will the states do to improve the river's health?
I would be lying if I said that the state negotiators sit in the room and say, what are the environmental consequences of this action? But what I will say is that everyone knows that we can't do anything for the environment if we don't have agreement on how people use water. And the scenarios that we're talking about in particular, the scenarios that get us really hung up, it's hard to see how there's not devastating impacts to our economies and people if we don't rapidly change our culture. And so Mother Nature and the environment will survive on what is there, but it's incumbent upon us to do what we can to address the problem proactively. In order to live through the really dire hydrologies, you have to make some investment that you might not need. And the more of that we can do, the more protective we are of the environment and of the living river and of all of the other uses that rely upon the river. But that takes change. Brad said we need to get used to living within a 10 million acre foot river. And sadly, that's not the challenge. A 10 million acre foot river is fairly easy to live within. What we can't live within is 3 years of a 5 million acre foot river. And how much we invest to buffer against that will directly correlate to how much of a river we have for all of the other resources that are out there, recreation, the environment, everything that we love that's not actually using the water is highly dependent upon what we're willing to do to buffer against the really dry scenarios. And the more we can do to bolster ourselves against those scenarios, the better off everything on the river is.
I think Colby addressed the question really well. The thing I would add to it is so many of the commentary is sort of imbued with a particular viewpoint or through a particular lens. And when people talk about a living river in South Piney Creek, Wyoming is wildly different than how people experience the river in the main stem and the lower basin. And so I think the fundamental metric is, are you the best steward of your resource? Are you making the proactive investments? Are you going to leave capital? Are you going to make a capital investment that you may not generate your desired yield on because you are concerned about 3 years of a 5 million acre foot river? That's the mindset we, I think, are adopting and need to more rapidly adopt. Is how do you value resiliency in your water rates or in your investments and your management scheme in the Colorado River system? And that was a long way to say I agree with Colby.
All right, so I'm going to combine a couple of questions, perhaps they're comments. So interstate water negotiations are politics, they are political. I think the nice version of this question is, where can the public go to find out details about what's happening? And the more pointed question was, why should this be excluded from judicial and other democratic processes? Why is it being done behind closed doors?
Yeah, right. I defy you to be a water rights holder in Colorado, New Mexico, Wyoming, or Utah and not know the status of the Colorado River negotiations. I would also say that Arizona has done a tremendous job through their reconsultation committee. I'm not as fluent in the, this isn't a swipe, it's just an observation, with the lightly regulated monopoly in Clark County. Maybe it's a swipe, but I know the River Board of California has its own processes. For stakeholders who are engaged, you can get this information. It is just not above the fold on the New York Times or the Washington Post, but it could be, and I'm grateful that it's not. My point is that an anecdote about Colorado in particular. I see a lot of good friends from the Southern Rectangle, and they have round tables. They have innumerable ways to talk about how things are progressing. And I know people call lots of the people in the room with some frequency. So I think that from a, is this a democratic process? No, it's a representative process. And representatives are in the room doing the good work, and they spend, from my observation, a great deal of time telling folks how it's going, which is why Colby was, in her remarks, talking about give people space. So I'll stop there.
I'm going to answer it two ways. The first way I would say is this is inherently a NEPA process, which by definition is a public process. Everything that's being considered gets spelled out with modeling results, with detail about the impacts to the reservoirs and our economies and social justice and the tribes. That all comes. I think what's frustrating to the outside is that they're not being briefed on everything that's being built and talked about to go into that draft EIS. And I would frame that two ways. There's clearly legal disputes between the states, upper basin, lower basin, water users, what the federal government's responsibility is, what reclamation's role is, what reclamation's authorities are. And this is much more, coming to a 7-state agreement is much more like a settlement discussion and a settlement negotiation than it is a court proceeding. This is where you're doing the work behind the scenes to see if you can come up with something so you don't have to depose everyone. and put them up on the stand and question them and cross-examine them. That's what the states and reclamation are doing together, is trying to figure out how to settle all of these things. And I'm going to use a snowball analogy now. I've not built many snowmen. I'm born and raised in Las Vegas. But you have to get a little bit of snow to stick together to start making a snowball. And then you have to get a little bit more snow to stick to that, to make it bigger. And then if you're going to make a snowman, do you want to build a snowman? That's a Frozen reference. Then you've got to have even more of everything sticking together. And what's happening in this basin right now is somebody starts to build a snowball and somebody smashes it when it's about this big. But you're asking us to explain to you how we're going to build a snowman, and the answer is stop smashing the frickin' snowballs. And you think I'm joking, but the states try to make progress, and word gets out of what we're doing before we even understand all of the implications and all of the modeling and whether it's a good thing or whether it's a bad thing. And a water user or an interest group or a water right holder or an attorney is in there saying, that doesn't work for us. That's smashing the snowball while you're expecting us to make a snowman. And we've got to get past that to where there is enough momentum that we can even show it to people. And we've not been able to get that momentum since the upper basin and lower basin alternatives were revealed. We've got to, and it's the same Revolutionary War thing, we've got to give some armor to the people negotiating to see if this is something that they are willing to stand up and be shot at. And we've not done that very well so far. And I know that's frustrating from the outside, but it's incredibly nuanced on the inside. And again, I said, you know, I'm fairly lucky where Nevada sits. Arizona and California's politics and water rights framework and water user groups and interaction of tribes and the standing of tribes is so wildly different, even amongst their two states. But how do you bring all those water user groups together when as soon as we start talking about an idea, somebody gets mad because it hurts them? And so, again, we just have to build enough momentum to make it going. I'll give you one last analogy because I'm going to ride the divorce horse all day. If we showed up to divorce court with my mom, my sister, my favorite cousin, and the same for Chuck, we would end in a bloodbath every single day. So you have to trim the group that's relevant and closest to the discussion and the impacts before you start broadening it and socializing it. I think everyone in the room on the 7-state level wants the broad buy-in of this water user community. That's what builds resilience. That's what allows our voluntary programs to work. That's when the NGOs can use their network and relationships to bring on the ranchers and the farmers and the programs that help put water in the basin. That's where the research community is able to bring in new tools and new ideas for how we do the same with less water. None of that works until we start having momentum all together moving the same way. So again, I just ask for some grace to let that momentum build a little bit, and then armor the people that we have negotiating to be able to take some shots and stand behind something that is going to require compromise. I'm done.
We're at 2:29. Should that be the last word?
I think we can wrap there. So please join me in thanking our guests.